Everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you so very, very much for taking the time to tune in today, and thank you for being so doggone good looking. I appreciate you. As always, feel free to reach out to us on the Discord room. You can join us over at Beekeeping for Newbies. We got lots of different things going on all over the place with some, actually, if you go to beekeepingfornewbies.com, it's NEWBEES. You can get links to swarm trap plans, nuke plans. There's a link to the Discord room in there. All that good fun stuff. Today we're going to do episode 150, 150 episodes, absolutely insane. But we're doing that today. So it's episode 150. Now, for those of you who remember the earlier years, I would do bee buzzes kind of like maybe a couple of times a month. And what I would do is I would compile all the emails that I got from people over the past few weeks. And I would just take all the questions, figuring if one person asks a question, there have to be like 5,000 or 10,000 people that have the same question. So let's just try to answer it for everybody. We did that quite a bit years ago. And I don't know, it just kind of fell off. No real reason why. I think it's just the sheer volume of questions. I ran a search. I used a little utility and I ran a search against my my inbox for the past few years. And I was like, oh yeah, just give me, like the first 200 questions. And I think within about like 20 seconds or whatever, it had 200 questions and it wasn't even a quarter of the way through. If you guys enjoy the Q&A style of thing, I can kind of bring a bee buzz back and maybe incorporate that into a weekly or bi-weekly kind of thing. Again, if you're enjoying that and appreciate it, I like doing it because it's kind of easy, kind of a little bit of laziness on my part, but it's usually a lot of fun. So we'll check it out. Today's warm-up song is brought to you by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, Tracks of My Tears from 1965. And I also want to thank all of you for hitting over 500,000 downloads, 30,000 downloads a month, and for putting us in the top 1.5% of all podcasts in the world. You guys are awesome. You're the best. Thank you so much for letting me wake up and do this every day for you. Okay, let's dive into it. I'm going to start by actually a message I got in the Discord room today. And the reason that I wanted to bring this message up, I'm not going to share the person's name, but she'll know who she is. There is a tremendous amount of conflicting information, a little bit of maybe some hypocrisy, a lot of weird stuff in the beekeeping community. Now, I've been involved in a lot of different things in my life, and I don't know what it is about beekeeping. I think it's not even close. Like, it is not even close when you talk about just how much really, really bad information is out there. It is everywhere all the time. And I used to kind of go in with this mindset of like, I can make it better. Like I can fix it. I can help everybody. And you can't. It is beyond repair. You're not going to be able to fix it. There are just people who, and again, I've said it before, a lot of people, I think it's really good intentions. I don't think anybody's sitting down nefariously like, Dr. Evil, like, wahaha, like we're going to get these guys. I don't think it's anything like that. I just think that somebody hears something and they go, that sounds good enough. And then they just run with it. Like what I have a tendency to do is if I don't know or I have no experience in something, I don't mind telling you like, hey, I haven't done that before. I'm not really familiar with it, but it's my understanding that fill in the blank. And that way you're kind of level setting things. You're like, hey, I've heard this. I don't know it to be 100% true, but at least it kind of qualifies the information you're putting out. You can't put things out definitively and be like, no, the earth is 100% flat. Like it's totally flat. There's like, it just is. Now, I mentioned that. That's probably a really bad example because there are still a lot of people who are on the earth is flat kind of thing. So maybe I should pick a better example than that. But if you're going to pick something and you want to die on that hill, make it not something really obvious. But that's the problem in beekeeping. And I think this email illustrates it well. The best illustration of it, and I don't have it in front of me, but the best illustration of it was somebody had posted a meme. And, I'm going to find this right now. I'm going to read this to you. It was in the Discord room because it was absolutely hilarious. All right, everybody, I looked for it. I can't find it. It's so funny, too. I wish I could find it. Maybe I'll post it or bring it up on another day or whatever. But basically what it said, it was something like it had all these like rules. I think the message said, things I've learned in my first 2 years of beekeeping or something like that. And it was like, number 1, always feed your bees, but make sure that you never feed your bees. It was like one of those kind of things. And it's funny, but like sad. And you've heard me harp on this. If you're an early adopter, early listener, and you've gone back in the very beginning episodes, I really harped on this a lot where I said, hey, it's really important for you to get a mentor. Now I'm kind of almost on the fence about even giving that guidance because I've had so many people that come up and they're like, yo, my mentor told me I should do this. And I'm like, they told you what? Are they a beekeeper or is it like a random guy off the street? Because that's terrible guidance. And there's a lot of that out there. But I'm still going to stay with that. I still think you need to try to find a mentor if possible. I think that's going to be your best path forward, because what you really need is somebody who's local to you, who understands the conditions and understands all those variables. I can sit here and talk to you guys every day, all day, and be 100% correct in everything I say in the 1.3 acres that I live on. And you can be 50 miles away from me and be like, Jeff, you're wrong like more than half the time. I don't know if it's quite that bad, but there are just things that are vastly different from one place to the next. And I think that that's what makes it really difficult to hold somebody accountable. It's hard to say, hey, you're wrong. Like there are certain biological components. Like when someone says, well, my worker brood usually takes about 28 to 30 days. Like when you hear that, when you're like, no, dude, you can't change biology. Well, I mean, you kind of can, and I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, by biological scientific definitions, you can't change biology. If there is a worker honeybee, that honeybee is going to take 21 days to go from an egg to emerging as a worker bee. Can't change that. So if someone tells you it's 28 days, that's wrong. That's pretty clear, easy to figure out. So I want you to do the best you can. This is where it goes back to taking a lot of notes, using them year after year. There are some basic, fundamental kind of things you hear me talk about a lot where I say, hey, don't take honey from your bees in years one, or year one, singular. So if you said, for example, I started a nuke in May of 2025, I kept notes all year. I did everything you said I should do. In the spring of 2026, they still, I had moved them up into a double deep configuration with the honey super. I overwintered, 2 deeps. And when I took everything apart, and started doing my first inspections in March of 2026, they still had 6 frames of honey. Cool. I love that. So now you might say, hey, it's spring flow time. I'm going to go ahead and take 4 of those frames for myself. And they went into the winter with 12 frames of honey or whatever it might be for you. And a lot of people, let me go into this email because there's some things that I want to talk about that are contained in this email as well. So the young lady says, I listened to your podcast about feeding. I think as a new beekeeper, confusion comes from many things. The first being you're told to feed the bees during a dearth, but some colonies might not need it. And how do you determine which ones do and which ones don't? Like, how do you know this colony is strong and has enough and the other doesn't? Package bees we get, but just regular colonies is hard to determine. So let me kind of pause right there and see if I can keep track of where I am. This is incredibly difficult, right? If you're an experienced beekeeper, you got 3, 4, 5 years under your belt. Sometimes you can actually forget what it was like to be a new beekeeper a long time ago. And I think back and I'm like, I didn't know I was in a dearth. What does that really even mean? Like, I don't know how much honey is enough. Like, I saw this ramp up when I first installed my packages years ago. And I remember reading all this stuff. Do you feed? Do you not feed? I never feed bees. Okay, but you got to put that in context, right? Like, I generally don't feed my bees, but there are times that I do, right? So I know that's really confusing. But I remember those first times with the packages and seeing all this growth and being so excited. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I threw my second deep on and then they didn't touch it. And there was like nothing going on. And I'm like, well, what do we do next? And then they died. And I was like, well, how did this happen? Like, they're bees. They're supposed to be out getting stuff. What's going on? I didn't understand the forage and the nectar flow cycles, and I didn't understand how all of that came together. So there are a lot of moving parts, and it's really difficult. So that's where, again, if you have a mentor who can help you out, that's great. What I would say to expect is to look at your area, try to find some of those like forage maps and things. And I do have an episode that I'm putting some notes together for, talking about how to discover the forage in your area and what to do and the best way to kind of go about being ahead of the game on when you may or may not have to feed. Here's the answer that I'm going to give to anybody. I don't care if it's your first year or your 10th year. If you don't know, when in doubt, go buy a 5-pound bag of sugar. What's that going to be, like a 2-point-something kilograms? I'm trying to be more metric friendly there, but like 2.5 kilograms, something like that. But get you like a 5-pound bag of sugar, mix up some sugar syrup, put it in the hive and see what they do with it. The best measure of whether or not they need sugar or need a supplement is by giving them some. There are some folks in our Discord room talking over the past couple of days, and they're like, mine are drinking a quart a day. That's not unusual at all. I used to put out a 5-gallon bucket feeder when I was open feeding, when I had like 25 or 30 hives, not at my house, definitely not here, because that would probably be against the rules. But when I was at a place where you were allowed to have 50 hives at that house, but I would have an open feeder out, and they would crank through a 5-gallon bucket, like a Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards or Canadian Tire. I'm trying to see if I can cover all of my great hardware stores. Wherever you get your bucket from and you make your bucket feeders, they're going through 5 gallons a day. So that's a 25-pound bag of sugar that I put in those a day. So start doing the math on how expensive it can be to feed a lot of colonies. But that's what I was doing. So give them feed and see if they take it. If they don't take it, they probably don't need it, reevaluate. But this question of, how do you know if they're strong or not strong? Strength it's really kind of subjective. Like if I walk into a colony in, let's say, July, I open them up where I am in my yard. I open up a colony or a hive, open everything up, and I'm looking at it. And if I don't see at least 6 or 7 frames of honey in July, we're going to have a problem, because I know that they're going to need probably about 10 to 12 to make it through the winter, roughly. Could be less depending on the colony and the way they're laid out. But, roughly about 10 to 12 is a pretty good assumption. If I see 6, I know they're going to use 3 or 4 more probably, just getting them through the rest of the summer. And then I've got to get them ramped up again in the fall with some fall feeding. But again, you don't know. So if you're taking all your notes and somebody is giving you some quality guidance, now there's things that I do. I don't like to talk about it, because I really want to stay focused on the ways that I can help you guys that don't involve you spending extra money. I do have some membership plans and different programs and things that are run through Buy Me a Coffee, where we can set up different calls and we can talk you through things, and you can give me pictures, or we can do video. There's lots of things that can be done. It is a paid engagement, right? You're going to have to actually spend some money with that, but you are going to get one-on-one discussions with me. We're going to walk through things. We can go through different setups, challenges you're facing, or whatever. I really like to find all the ways I can to get you information for free, but time is I don't have enough time to keep up with everything anymore. I'm probably dealing with 200 emails a day. It's pretty rough. So if you do need some dedicated help, there are ways we can get that for you. But taking lots of really good detailed notes are going to be tremendously valuable year over year. And it's a little bit tougher from year 1 to year 2, because now you get the amazing variables of the weather and all the other things that are going on, because next year is not going to be the same as this year. And you're like, crap, right? But once you get 5, 6, 7 years of data, if you can hang in there long enough, I think it'll be worth it. Which, on a quick pivot, that's why a lot of people have really shifted over to doing a lot of swarm trapping, because they don't want to spend $225, $250, $300 on a nuke box. I can tell you right now, I'm not doing that. I am not going to do that. I'm going to catch 1 to 2 swarms. I'm going to make a cell builder. I'm going to graft 15 or 20 queen cells, put them in mating nukes, feed the crap out of them, and hopefully have 20 hives in 2 months. That's my goal right now. I am not buying colonies for $250 a piece. I'll quit beekeeping before I do that. Okay, back to her question. Also, the understanding I was given was feed them during the dearth and fall so they don't eat their winter storage. Is this true? What you're doing is, think of it this way. From, let's say, March 15th, whatever the day is where they kind of start getting active again. Sometimes it's in February, January or February, depending on where you are. For some people, some folks, that's not till April or May. We're all talking 100% Northern Hemisphere here. When your bees start working on whatever rough period of time, we'll use March 15th as an example. On March 15th, when they start gathering, they are not gathering for April or May or June. Yes, there's a lot of what they're gathering that will be used immediately to feed the new brood that they're trying to rear to ramp up for the spring-summer surge. That is very true. But their mindset is we are trying to get everything we can right now in preparation for November, December, January, February of next year. They are working today on what they're going to need 6 to 10 months from now. So it doesn't matter. I don't look at anything they have in a honey frame as being summer food, fall food, winter food. What I'm looking at is I know roughly how many pounds and how many frames of honey that I need them to have to overwinter at my house. It's a different number down at my property, 70 miles away, different scenario. which it's so much easier there because there's so much forage. You treat for varroa, give them space, keep an eye on the hive beetles, and the rest kind of takes care of itself down there. It's a lot easier. But don't view feeding them and the things that they're consuming as like individual seasons. Look at that as just long term. Between now, whatever it is in the spring, and whenever it gets too cold for them to forage again in like October, November, everything during that 6-month period is all for the winter. So when they say that you're feeding them so they don't eat their winter storage, it's I'm feeding them so that they have enough to put aside for the entire winter. Okay, the next part of that is being a new beekeeper. It's hard to know how much honey is enough honey. When you hear 60 pounds, like how much is that? So the first thing I would say to you, honestly, different types of honey, it's kind of like dealing with a 5-gallon container of gasoline or a 5-gallon container of water or a 5-gallon container of oil. Like different things are going to have slightly different densities to them. Now you're looking at, water concentration inside of honey is typically like in that 16 to 18% range. And then the rest is, of course, the actual yummy goodness that is the honey. But they can still be slight differences in density between the honey itself, the equipment that you're using, the thickness of the equipment you're using, things like that. What I would generally do is just grab a hive box. I would have a scale. I step on the scale. And because I'm really light, it comes in at like 170 or something like that. Not true. Very fake information. And then I get on the scale, get that measurement, and then I hop on there with the hive body and then take a new measurement. That's what I do generally for some things. And it's primarily just so that I wouldn't be putting, people are like, dude, you can just put the honey box on top of the scale. And you can, if you have like a dedicated one that you leave in the bee yard or, lock away to be used with the bees, you can do that. I generally tend to like steal the one from the house and use it. So instead of setting things down that like have honey on them and propolis and wax, and then it messes up your scale, I just step on and step off. But if you can weigh it, just physically actually weigh it somehow, putting it on a scale, or you can do some of the tilt methods where you put half the hive up and lift up some of it and put the other scale in the back, multiple scales. There's lots of different weighing techniques. The balance technique where you actually tilt it up, lift it, and balance it kind of in the middle on the single scale. You can put a hoist kind of system where you have like a block and tackle or something like that with a scale hooked to it. And you can, hook up and actually lift up and measure that way. Whatever method that you want to use, somehow just being able to measure roughly the hive body. So that's how I would do. For me, usually somewhere in that like 30 pounds is a pretty good measure for a medium honey super. Well, let me say that a little bit differently. I can get 30 pounds of honey out of a medium honey super. So when you add on some of the extra wax that's there, it might be like 40 pounds, something like that. Again, it's going to kind of depend on how many frames are completely drawn out. Do you have 10 frames? Do you have 9 frames? The couple of different variables in there, but just try to find a way to get an actual weight of them. That's the best recommendation I can have. But what you can also do too is if you're not so concerned, if you don't want to focus on the poundage, which is completely fine, you can just say, I know that if I have, let's say you have a double deep configuration and you added a honey super during the season, you can say, well, I know that as long as I have 8 to 10 total frames within the deeps of honey, that's enough. A whole lot of people overwinter a single brood box. They'll have a 10 frame deep and they will overwinter bees in that. As long as it's mostly packed out with honey, that's a very acceptable approach in a lot of places. So instead of worrying about the total pounds, maybe try to think of it in terms of how many frames that you have. And also be mindful of the difference between a medium frame and a deep frame, because obviously you can store a lot more honey on a deep frame than you can on a medium. Okay, so when you hear 60 pounds, how much is that? Okay, will that last them through the summer dearth to the following spring, or do you feed them so they say? Oh, I think she meant save. Or do you feed them so they save their honey? Is this even a thing? So I think I just kind of covered most of that there, right? Everything you're storing now is towards getting them through the season. When you're told to feed 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, I've heard conflicting information about this, literally being taking a measuring cup scoop, 1 cup of water, dumping in with 1 scoop of sugar. Others saying that's not how you do it. So you can see the confusion, just my thoughts and questions. I used to have to look that up. I could never remember year over year like what the formula was, or how do you do this? I could never, I don't know why. I think it's one of those things where you do it once a year, you just don't remember. So I used to look it up every year and be like, oh, okay, it's so many ounces to so many ounces or whatever. And I would do the mixing that way. Once Michael Palmer said, hey, what I do is I take a bucket, take a 5-gallon bucket as an example. I go to the inside of it. I take a Sharpie and I put a mark with the Sharpie. I fill it to that line with just regular, granulated sugar. I then add water and I start mixing it up. As I mix it up thoroughly, that water level will drop and I can see my line, and there's going to be, 3, 4, 5 inches of space between the line and the top of the sugar water. He says, then add more water and then mix it all up again. And it's going to drop a little bit more, and then add more water and mix it up again. Once you get to a point where you are no longer adding any water, but everything is as mixed as it can possibly be without the water level dropping, that is a perfect 2-to-1 sugar syrup mix. That's all I needed to hear right there. I'm like, perfect. There's a way that somebody who is well respected and reputable within the beekeeping community there at French Hill Apiaries up in Vermont, Michael Palmer. I'm like, this guy knows what's up, and that is the easiest way in the world. I'm never doing anything else again, and I've never gone back. So you do whatever works for you. A lot of people will say, well, I give them 1-to-1 to stimulate, them drawing up comb. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a nectar flow. Nectar flow is food. Nectar flow by itself inherently stimulates them to draw comb, right? So I think that that's another disconnect, is there's this idea that my bees will go out and they're going to forage and they're going to bring stuff back, but I have to give them feed to stimulate them to draw comb. No, food by itself, when there is nectar and pollen that they are trying to bring in and they need a place to put it, that by itself is going to stimulate them to draw comb. Whether it's a natural feed through pollen and nectar or a synthetic feed through pollen substitutes and sugar syrup, doesn't matter which one it is. If one of those two circumstances are taking place, they're going to draw comb. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to do both. It absolutely, like the people I mentioned earlier, their bees are taking down, even though a flow is on, they're taking down a quart of sugar syrup a day. I love having it in the hive, particularly during ramp up times, so it allows them to be feeding 24 hours a day. I have nothing wrong with that, or I have no objection to anybody doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I just want you to understand, it's not like the only way we're going to get comb is if we're feeding them 1-to-1 sugar syrup. Not true at all. If they're getting 1-to-1 sugar syrup, they're going to draw comb. If they're getting 2-to-1, they're going to get twice as much sugar in the same footprint, and they're going to draw comb. If there's a nectar flow on, they're going to draw comb. So I'm hoping that helps out just a little bit here. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of that, and we're probably almost halfway through the episode or better, but we're going to dive into some questions here. Now, like I said earlier, we haven't done a bee buzz in a long time. I'm going to go through, it looks like based on time, I'm probably going to run through and maybe do 15 or 20 questions today. If you guys are like, man, this is pretty cool, like I'm a new person over the past year or so and haven't heard this before, and I really like the Q&A thing, let me know. Just drop a message in Discord, shoot me an email or whatever, and we can bring it back. Like I said, this quick list I put together, I think I put 37 of them in here. I know right now we're not going to get beyond probably 10 or 15, but let me know if you like it and we can bring it back. All right, how do I know when it's time to open the hive for the first inspection of the season? What I like to target personally is different from what other people do. What a lot of people will do, and let me step back real quick. There's two types of openings. This question was specific to open for the first inspection of the season. If we're talking inspection, I really like my temps to be as much above 60 as possible. I like 70. If the temperature hits 70, I'm a lot happier about it. I will do an inspection like in the mid 60s. I really don't like to have the hive open at under 60. I don't. And, some people are like, oh, you're completely fine up to 45 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Fine. If that's what works for you and you like that, do that. I, in my mind, think, what's the difference? What impact am I going to have if I open it, let's say today, when it's 52 degrees, or if I wait 5 days when it's going to be 67? Now, I think it makes sense to maybe open a little bit earlier. Like if you have a warm day, let's say it's February 20th, and it's a warm day and the bees are starting to fly. As soon as the bees start flying, the clock starts ticking on their lives. And that's just the reality of kind of summer honeybees. So I like to get a peek inside the hive at the very top. I'm not talking about tearing things down and pulling out a lot of frames, just the very top. I want to look in and see what their stores look like, how much honey is still left for them. If I look up in the top and I see 2 or 3 frames of honey still, I'm closing it back up. I'm not worried about it. They only need to make it a few more weeks before the weather's getting really nice. But as far as a full, tear down kind of inspection goes, the first possible available day that I have where that temperature outside is at least 62, 65 or better, that's probably when I'm going to do my inspection. I'm going to gauge how long I'm doing the inspection or how detailed of an inspection it is based on that temperature outside. But really, I'm trying to be very quick. I want to get in, take a quick peek, do a quick assessment, and I use that little lapel mic thing that plugs into my iPhone with my voice memo. And I'm like, okay, this is hive number 27. I've got a double deep configuration here, and we're going to go ahead and open this up. And right now, okay, I've got this and this and this. And I start talking through everything I see, and then I transcribe my notes later. That works really well for me. But it really comes back to when are those first nice days that you can get in and kind of take a look. What should I look for during my first spring hive inspection? There's a lot of things I'm checking for. So the number one thing I want to see is how much food is left, because in that first inspection, it is highly probable that you are going to have multiple cold spells beyond that nice warm day. So you might open the hive up first time on March 10th. I guarantee by March 20th, you're going to have 4 cold days. Somewhere between April 2nd and the 10th, you're going to have a bunch of cold days. You're going to have a bunch of rainy days. Ask some of the people in our Discord room how much rain they've had lately. I mean, people on the Eastern Shore, Missouri, Indiana, a lot of people have been very vocal. Pennsylvania, all the stuff that's been going on lately with all these thunderstorms and tornadoes and rain. All of these things keep the bees inside. If they're inside and the weather is warmer and nicer, they're going to be active. The more active they are, the more food they're going to consume. So the first thing I'm looking for is how much food's available. I then want to look at the overall, just general health and movement of the bees. Do all of the bees look like normal bees? So for example, if I open up and I see a lot of bees that have a black and kind of waxy appearance to them, I may be concerned that they've got chronic bee paralysis virus or acute bee paralysis virus. I might be concerned that there's some kind of a problem going on that would cause them to actually lose their hair and make them look, really dark. Now, it is possible, not at this time of year, obviously, but there are bees that, when they're robbing and they're involved in a lot of robbing activities, the bees that are trying to get them away can kind of, pluck some of their hairs out and things like that. And they can start to give a little bit of a black appearance, like all black appearance to them. But for the most part, I'm looking at them to see, does it look like a normal honeybee? Are they moving around regularly? Am I able to visibly see mites? Mites are kind of hard to see, especially when you're getting a little bit older. Something happened, man. Right at 40, I started wearing reading glasses every now and then. I cracked 50, and it's like reading glasses are permanently stuck to my head. I have glasses that are by DeWalt, protective safety glasses that have that stupid bifocal thing on them. Because if I'm making a line and trying to measure with a tape measure or a ruler, I can't see the stupid numbers anymore. I don't know why they decided to make everything smaller, but they did. So anyway, I can't really look down and see varroa mites with my eyes. But if you take pictures, take lots of pictures of your frames with your bees as close as you can get to them, then you can zoom in on them later and you can even see if there's some mites on them before you do your first mite wash, which needs to be probably not in that first quick check, but definitely when you do a nice big detailed inspection as they're ramping up, you want to get that mite wash done as early as possible. So in addition to making sure that they have enough food and things still stored up, they should, by the time I'm doing my first inspection, they should already have some pollen coming in. They should have some stored. I want to see brood. By that point in time, by the time I open the hive for the first time myself, I should see capped brood. I should see capped worker brood. There should be some drone brood in there a little bit. And I should see all stages of development, eggs, open larvae, capped brood. There should be a lot of activity. I would like to see it across multiple frames, but that's really going to be dictated more by the size of that colony and the conditions in your area. But as long as you see that shows that I've got nurse bees, they're working, they're doing their job, resources are coming in, and we're ramping up. That's kind of high level what I'm looking for. I don't want to see other things too, hive beetles or other things, but that's a lot less common, really early in the season. Okay, next, how do I tell if my bees made it through the winter strong or weak? I think we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier with strong and weak being, sort of subjective, but you open up the hive and look inside and go to the middle, and let's say there's 2 frames in the middle, and all of the bees for the whole hive are just inside that little space, and there's no food anywhere. You got a problem. You have a really, really big problem. And this happens a lot. I mean, we're talking hundreds of bees, 500, 600, 700 bees, maybe if you're lucky. The only thing you can do is start pumping them with sugar syrup. Get sugar syrup in there. If you want to give them any kind of like a pollen substitute, if you want to do that, you can do that as well. There should be pollen in the environment coming in, but they may not have enough resources to even go out and forage effectively. You're on life support at that point in time if they're that bad off. But like I mentioned earlier, right, you may just make it your standard practice. Every spring when I open up my spring hives, I'm going to go ahead and put a feeder in there, and then I'm going to re-inspect again in, first inspection of the year. You come back in 10 to 14 days, and you look and you go, okay, well, geez, all of that's gone. You may come back a little. You definitely want to come back and peek in. You want to come back and just take a peek at your feeder, obviously, like at 3 to 5 days. You don't have to do a full teardown. But, come back again in a couple of weeks and see, what the status of the colony is after your intervention of some sugar syrup. But you're never going to go wrong if you just want to drop a frame feeder or a jar feeder or something in there every spring, and that's your spring protocol, regardless of how strong or weak the colony is. I would have no problem with that. I think that's a good idea. When is it too early to add a second box? Oh, let me go back actually to the strong, weak question there. A lot of this is going to come down to some experience. Like I just covered a couple of things where you open it up, you only see a few bees, you see a lot of bees, you see a lot of resources, you see no resources. That's all well and good. It's really going to come down to you making notes and then comparing notes year over year. And again, like I mentioned, if you have a mentor or someone who knows more than you, it's going to be really helpful to open it up and be like, oh crap, these gals need some help. Okay, when is it too early to add a second box to my hive? There's kind of the generic rule of like around 70%. Like once you get 70% utilization of a hive body, you want to add more space. What's kind of equally or maybe even more important is to make sure that they're using the space they have. And what I mean is, and again, I feel like I'm a broken record, but I know there's a lot of people who've never heard this because they don't go back and listen from episode 1 to 150, so I completely get it. But there is, people space and bee space. Just because you stick a frame in there doesn't mean the bees see that as expansion space. So if you put a hive body on, sometimes they just swarm and you're like, this doesn't make any sense at all. I've got 2 deeps. There's 3 frames available on the bottom, 10 frames available on the top, and they swarmed and I don't know what's going on. You're right to not know what's going on, to be frustrated and upset because people keep telling you add more space. The bees have to see that space. They have to see that as actual space that they can use. So we've talked about that several times before. We'll probably cover it again here. And again, you can ask the question in the Discord room or ping us later on if you want more details there. But just be mindful that just because you see it as available doesn't mean they see it. But to answer the question, when is it too early? The important thing with bees in the off season or in the the winter coming into spring is always going to be for them to be able to maintain kind of homeostasis within the colony. They want everything to be in a nice state of balance. And when you have a depleted colony, right, they've lost a lot of bees over the winter, the cluster's gotten smaller, and now they're trying to ramp up. So they're sending out a lot of foragers, which means all of those bees are going to be dead in the next probably 7 to 10 days. They've got to do a big ramp up really, really fast. When those really cold nights still creep in, they've got to cluster together and keep themselves nice and warm. If you have a single box, as an example, like a single deep, that entire deep with all the frames together and the bees is kind of its own little, thermal ecosystem. If you add another box on top of that, particularly one that's empty, that's a big space that they now have to heat and warm up just to kind of maintain a good temperature. Now, in the grand scheme of things, if it's, say, 40 degrees Fahrenheit outside, if you had one box inside versus 2, is it a big enough temperature difference to take the hive out? Probably not, right? For the most part, if you just have a day or 2 of a cold spell here and there, it's probably not a big deal. If you have extended periods of time where you have, one of these cold spells where it gets down into, and again, we're talking all Fahrenheit, but if we want to go Celsius, this is actually easy too. If you're down around 0 to 5 degrees Celsius, maybe somewhere between 30 to 35 Fahrenheit, and that's an extended period of time, and you have an extra box, they're going to use resources to heat that space. So what I generally do is I kind of let them get to the point where I don't want to say that they're bursting at the seams, but they don't have a lot of space left. They're kind of filling things out and using it well. It's weird to try to explain to somebody. But again, it's like anything else that you've done for years. Like you just kind of look at it and be like, man, we need to do something here. And as a new beekeeper, you kind of don't know what you don't know. So what I would advise to a new beekeeper is when in doubt, put it on. So if you're not sure, go ahead and put it on. You're going to be better off to manage the loss of a couple of bees because they got colder earlier, and maybe you have to feed them a little bit earlier, feed them a little bit more. You still have bees to work with. You give them too much space too late, and now you're into a swarming issue because it goes from touch and go, like, ooh, this is interesting, I'm not sure if they're going to make it through the winter, to holy crap, there's swarm cells everywhere. That happens really fast, particularly when you have bad weather and they have resources in the hive. If they've got resources in the hive and the weather is bad, they're going to keep working. They are not going to be like, oh, it's raining today, I guess we're going to kick back and watch a little Netflix. No, they're cranking along. They're still working. Okay, next question. How do I know if my queen made it through the winter? This is actually really easy. You open up the hive in the spring for your first inspection, and when you see eggs, larvae, capped brood, all that kind of stuff, you have a queen. I don't think I can do much different than that. And that's literally all you're looking for. I mean, you're looking for if the queen lived, but there's nothing in there, there's no eggs, larvae, anything else, then there's a food issue. So if you open up and you look through the whole hive and there's honey everywhere, they're bringing in pollen, they've got maybe some bee bread put aside, everything that is needed to make bees is there, and you don't see eggs, larvae, capped brood, capped drone brood, all those things, then you probably have a queen problem. But if there's not a bunch of new replacement brood being raised, it's going to be absent queen or not enough food to feed them. All right, next question. What's the best way to clean out dead bees or leftover frames in early spring? Okay, so the first thing that I always like to try to do is do the best I can to figure out what is the cause of death. And, probably I'm going to make up a number and say like 90% of the time it's Varroa related. Like people will do, I don't want to sound critical because I was so bad. Like I was so bad with this early on. So when I make comments about this, like I'm not picking on people because I did the same stuff. And I'm really disappointed when I look back at old me and I'm like, God, why did I not take this seriously? So many people will like not do anything with Varroa. And then they'll treat once in like August. And then right after the treatment, they'll do a mite wash. And they're like, oh, cool, my mite counts are at 2. Awesome. And then their bees die and they don't make it over winter. And I'm like, well, it might be Varroa. And they're like, oh, no. I pulled my mite counts in August and September, and they were down around 2 or 3. The viral loads of those bees from the viruses that they obtained from the Varroa mites, their viral load from March, April, May was just continuing to elevate and explode during that period where they weren't being controlled, managed, and treated. So even though mites weren't present maybe in August or September, or they were really minimal, the viral load in the colony is always so high that they're just not going to be able to survive. So the first thing that I'm looking for is this probably something related to Varroa? Did they starve? If I open up the hive and I look inside and there's no food anywhere, there's no honey anywhere, I generally am like, okay, they may have been sick, but they definitely had no food. So that's where I'm like, okay, no food, probably starved. Food left over, I always go illness secondary to Varroa. That's usually my go-to on that one. What I really want you to pay attention to, though, is learn how to identify foul brood, particularly more American foul brood. That's the bigger threat. But I want you to learn, and I've got it on the Beekeeping for Newbies, NEWBEES.com, newbies homepage. There's a downloads link in there, and there's a couple of documents I have about American foul brood. Go look at those or any other foul brood resource you want. I want you to understand and learn how to identify a foul brood within your frames. This is something where this spore can live for like 50 to 70 years on your bee equipment, on the hardware, on your gloves, on your bee suit. It's a really, really serious thing. And this is why you don't always want to be buying used bee hardware from unknown sources. Now, you can take all your bee hardware and you can boil it in lye and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to do that. It's just not going to happen. So if you can determine, okay, what does foul brood look like? They didn't die of foul brood, which is, At least in my experience, I've never seen foul brood as being like an overwintering issue. Like a foul brood, in my experience, has been more of a spring, like a spring cut kind of thing. So I would see it April, May, June, but I don't recall ever seeing it in like an overwintered colony. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, not saying it can't happen, just not my experience. But that's what I want to look for is, and there's a foul odor too. It's one of those smells where once you smell it, you're like, okay, I know what that smells like. You definitely don't want to have that anywhere near your apiary. If you find or discover that, you're going to burn those pieces of hardware and it's just not going to get used. If it's just a regular dead out from starvation or disease, something, or maybe it was taken over by a bug, like maybe a hive beetle got in and their larvae everywhere, or a wax moth got in there and wax moth larvae all over the place. I just scrape the heck out of everything. I take a hive tool, just scrape everything and get off as much junk as I can possibly get off. As far as the actual hive parts and pieces go, a lot of times I'll take a tub, fill it with water, get some soapy water in there, use a brush, like when you're cleaning your car, you have a little handheld brush you use to scrub the tires or whatever. Any kind of a small handheld brush will do, Brillo pad, whatever you want to use, something with a mild abrasive, and you can just clean up all the parts, get all the funky stuff off of them, let them air dry out in the sun. Once they're good and dry, drop them in the freezer for 72 hours, and that's going to pretty much take care of you for all your frames. Like I said, just be mindful of what the cause of death was in the bees. That's going to be the big deal. Okay, I'm going to do one, maybe two more here. We're going to wrap it up. Can I reuse frames from a dead out if there's no sign of disease? So we just covered that. That one's kind of baked into this, which is going to be, we're going to clean them all up, make sure it's not foul brood related. We're going to freeze them and reuse. Should I be feeding my bees in the spring? I probably should have screened this a little bit better because some of these are... Actually, no, I had the list before I saw the email. Should I be feeding my bees in spring? And what's better, sugar syrup or pollen? So sugar syrup, carbs, pollen, protein. So they need both. Now, how you deliver to them is going to be different. A lot of your pollen substitutes and things are kind of geared with like a spring formula. There are certain amino acids and certain nutrients that they need in the spring that's really important for spring development, brood rearing, and all of that. There's other types of pollens and lipids and different things that their body is going to need to help them kind of store up and hold resources and hold fat and be able to overwinter. They need different things in the fall, winter than they do in the spring. So if you're using a pollen substitute, you just kind of want to get something that has, preferably as many of those spring nutrients and amino acids and things. That's going to give them the most benefit. But they need some kind of a balance. So you can just give them sugar syrup and then hopefully they're getting, tree pollen and other things, in the area to match up that balance between the carbs and the protein. So I guess the short answer is if you just give sugar syrup during a nectar flow, you should also be able to get pollen natively in the environment. All right, we'll go to an even 10. How long should I keep feeding my bees once spring flowers start blooming? I'm going to go ahead and stay with what I said before. Feed them until they stop taking it up. And once you get a good measure of how much of a resource or how many resources your bees need to have to thrive and survive, then you can taper that down the road. But feed early on until they stop taking it. All right, everybody. So I think that we actually made it through about 1/3 of the list, which is a little bit crazy. So I don't know. We'll see what you guys want. If you want more of it, I've got another 20 something on this list, and I've got like another 170 something still to go. If you guys enjoy the Q&A, we can definitely do more of this like we used to. Thank you again for 5 years and 150 episodes of beekeeping excitement. And with that being said, I'm going to wrap it up for this Monday, Cinco de Mayo. Have a margarita and a shot of tequila for me because I don't do it anymore. Take care. Be kind to one another. Remember that I love you. There's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.